pekale dulaido membala meje ulega chudenda mi kashi samba thanda mata yore kashi be chenja thama ma yitigana 땡고야 아니 배 초체 봐 아니 가시 이게 수준이 요래 가시 파 가지 야포체는 스틱 낙불라니 요래 가시 이게 수수게 내가 치디갈다 네버디라 로빠로 치디디갈라 꾸마준이 이제 여다 수수게 치면은 그 sem바 탈라마다라 드럼만데 치니 요래 저파 한사에 공고에서 봐 콘도게 되는 알 쓸라이도 되네 강에도 아니 칸 정말 되네 몽볼리도 오늘 얘기 갈래라 나 코너 로 사제도 코란즈 나스 제심바도들라 다치란즈게디 칼로르 히지제네 라야 포치고레스 가이스나 알란즈기 짱하마네 알란즈기 마 파마 마치바 지장요 말에 단데네 그 추란을파 가와고네 나콜로 로바 체투에기 니바지도 우지보 마인케라 말에 콜을 하지 게 바로 바 체투에 니바지디 나랑올라 카이치 야보치고 사네 콜로 넘버 다바치 쇼게네 마 소소 콜로 사마지케네 치고레 레기라 아니 집이 내고래 딱 이제 파이라 지 소소란 칙 두잘라와 나레 라파로 슈에네 인지미지 돈이고 semba thanda medigala hiji cheyagi yuremeze de khonta sai marwa dekho chirang chiune neba inare gyongo ina achi hutune ane phagi bhengal degore thinde jilanga chogi pha dandu thunju chena nya khol kangi te gal yanja dozi ta ro segera ra tidigala ane pe lelhabo yomalda chirang ta na jutha mena de zongel hakogo ra ya phagi le chadigala kangi te ola nga chumba chena ta dai la go sasigirda ra
So now, personally, I would suggest that you take some time before you make such a sudden shift. And because even when we are talking about business, there is an ethical way of doing business. And if you can find a way to do ethical business, then that in itself is an ethical way of making a livelihood. For example, when I say that business should not be solely driven by profit or by a motive of profit or gain, I'm not saying that we should dispense with profit at all when we do business. That's not what I mean. That only profit as the motivating factor to engage or go into business is not really wise. But the whole point of business is actually profit. But there is an ethical way of making profit. For example, someone brings some items from Delhi, from the capital, to Dharamshala. So in Delhi, if they get it for 50 rupees, then it makes sense that they at least charge 60 or 70 rupees for the effort they put into bringing this service or bringing this item to Dharamshala. That's an ethical way of doing business. The profit is there, you are providing a product or a service that is not found here in this area. And now, as opposed to that, when you actually try to sell this, then if you begin to lie, saying that this is the best product there, even though you know that it's maybe not the best quality, then if you try to push this onto others, maybe that's where that's where it begins to become a little bit unethical. And then, more importantly, when you are solely driven by a motive of profit and gain, not only does this have the effect in the manner in we engage in business, but also the manner in which we place a margin of profit becomes too extreme sometimes. It's no longer justifiable. And that's not really an ethical way of doing business. But there are ways of doing ethical business. For example, you could do business by looking around, see what service exactly is missing in a place, what product exactly is missing in a place, and try to begin to offer that service, that product, which is of use to others, for the people who really need it, and begin to offer these services and products. That's an ethical way of doing business. Now, so as such, I'm not saying that being in business itself is totally unethical. That's not the thing. That's not what I'm trying to say at all. With any kind of livelihood, profession that we pursue, there is an ethical way of doing it. Now, with that being said, it is indeed very, very commendable that you have this thought of changing your profession to go into nursing, because a nurse is a very, very noble profession if you think about it. Someone who really, really practically is helping others in distress, in suffering. With that being said, it is important to also understand that it's not an easy profession. It's very, very difficult, because I have myself run into a lot of people who went into nursing and who share that it's very, very difficult, the profession, that you really have to be tolerant, patient, and full of love for the patient. Otherwise, it's very difficult to survive in the profession. You not only have to deal with difficult patients, you should be willing to weather through the challenges you face. For example, you could be at the end of receiving, you will be at the end of at the receiving end of verbal abuse, physical abuse. You could be at the receiving end of blame, because people are in their worst moments, in their weakest moments when they are sick, and sometimes they become mentally unstable. Sometimes they become physically incapacitated. They are not able to do anything on their own. So you have to be able to find the patience, tolerance, love within yourself to help them in these moments. You cannot become demotivated, discouraged by the slightest inconveniences. And so as such, it is important to see that if you can really kind of weather through that challenges, face these challenges of the profession. And now, people who are already in such profession, in this profession as a nurse, I advise them that now, since you are already in this profession, it is important that through the experience you have, you begin to take joy in that profession, enjoy and appreciate the capacity or the ability that you have to actually help someone in distress, actually help someone who is suffering through. So, as such, it is important that we always find love, compassion in our hearts, rather than immediately judging people in their weakest moment, and then being distressed, being distressed and being disturbed ourselves. So it's a very, very challenging profession if you think about it. So you have to think whether you are really up for it, and think carefully about this before making the jump.
Да. Тилэн ато пибеги тан пежа. Санангал тан 케바인. 제바실레 제네 렘바인라라. 제스 담봉이라. 내가 디마쟁이라 아니 유더 젠다 용선 중군 참마하고고. 되니 체어이나 강이 되네. 스강이셔서 소마당아라 타지주인 아라기 담보네 하고 있선데라. 담보도 파이라 빼 아포이지레 최냐네 치도지 기보이지레 인더로텐도 아체 파이라 강이 되나? 안젤랑아 유만이 따따랑이 망이라가 빼 아포이데 되네야 됐으나 까데 가보체라.
So that's, in Tibetan we have a proverb or a saying that if you think ahead, that's the sign of a learned one. But if you begin to regret later on, that's the sign of a fool. So it is important that we think ahead about our expectations, whether we are projecting our expectations onto on something. And when things do not really live up to our expectations, do not turn out the way we expected, then we begin to develop regret later on. So rather than that, try to examine carefully before, try to see for yourself really if you're up for it.
Yeah, thank you. I'm not romanticizing nursing, by the way. I know it's one of the toughest professions in the world.
Yeah.
So I'm not delusional at all. So I know. Then my next question was like how to deal with like compassion fatigue and all that. Maybe I'll come back in a few years to ask you.
Kadi simre machesra. Kuran dende nawa chipchi chene nas chigin lagi mesra. Hagu yes nars la di pe lega kale khakbo ra. Lela oji mea hagu yes. Ta kuran gi thiwa jene dikuni de sons. Ani nars chewe jurim la ani ningji chamba la de zora. Malawa khandes ani gomgore la ni thiwa samso. Ine ta di jimanga nas chana ani lokhashi jene thigi.
Dede ngone chitang yang shochi ni sene ngone de che ye de ropa de lege de ngal la ji de. Ni penja je ko ni je Australia 아니 이게 서울어래라 이제 그 파일라 경고 genskon 내가 지금서라 되는 걸로 배 하다보다 지는 쓰까지 다로 지금 뭐 지금서 되는 거 점점 그런 생각 맞지로 쳐다 날 폰타인다 가다가 이게 거를 슬슬 치케 말에 경하게 추냐면 쳐서 야시들은 라위야 오늘아 나도 봐지 감바도 봐야 가서 보고미 컨트롤방에는 방석이 유메라 파이들 오늘 오라게 경하게 딱 칼 카티로 엔디도 딱딱 치두고라 등문에 빼야거라 경하게 주모마인가 단다이나게 레제션이 근데 저도 초도 치바다 오늘에 가서나 코빠기는 미미츠나나 제가 나치래는 가서 동해 채시 쓰고라 다 제가 동해도 가서 하고 나요 동해 가서 하고다 지금 남들 타나제는 지금 나들어서 앞에도 미질마테 뭐 간데 뭐 간데지나 진짜로 된대고라 근데 지금 변조가 이날에 코로나에서 보고 수세 이날에 강이 가나 태되고 되게 생도 동해라 근데지라 아니 상주 치투나 항상에 편도라 라 근데 이제도 배 개처머를 들레고네 전에 냠네 때를 하와징에 민두 사운드 근데 아버 치투나 말랑 삼수들더라 신바지랑 가서 잡아치랑 가서 봐 컨트롤방글은 깔에 커버와 라 이내야 디 소투야라 담보 저저치 냠네치 사노코고다 코네 아니 파기 치투라
So now I will anyways address your question about love and compassion. Because I have a nephew in Australia who is working as a caregiver for elderly people in old age home. And so in his work, then he began to feel a little bit frustrated because he's always at the receiving end of maybe unsavory words, extreme reactions from these old people. So as such, he used to complain and confided in me that I really feel frustrated in this job sometimes. But I always tell him that you need to be able to be calm in the face of these kind of challenges, because if you think carefully about it, there is no truer or more genuine practice of the Dharma than this. Because we all can appreciate that the most recognizable forms of suffering are the suffering of birth, aging, sickness, and death. And if we cannot find compassion for this for people who are actually suffering through these most recognizable forms of suffering, how exactly can you have compassion for people for whom the sufferings are not so evident, clear to us? So as such, there is no truer practice of the Dharma. There is no more genuine practice of the Dharma than being able to look after, care for, console people who are actually going through these suffering. And because if you think carefully about it, we are now in like a very conducive environment in an almost empty temple. And then if we begin to say that I want to cultivate the antidote to anger, cultivate the antidote to anger, aversion, and so forth, maybe that's not really true practice. True practice is cultivated in the face of challenges. And as such, they, in these professions, really do practice true Dharma if they are able to remain tolerant, patient, still find within themselves love, care, and compassion for people who are suffering through these things. So, from my own personal perspective, I think there is no truer or more genuine form of practice than this.
Yeah, I mean, at least I can try, you know.
Mm.
And I also think that it seems so useful to be able to be a nurse, you know.
Mm-hmm.
Maybe I don't want to be a vet nurse for the rest of my life, you know. I can do copies, but there's so many different forms of nursing.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm actually also going to Australia.
Tini tuwerta. Ko ta Kurang kazi tudu chee di Kurang kulung yusra. Nurse chena susu da tapshi chik chee dewa dus nurse chaya layra. Kaya na nurse chee gi nurse ki lega laya di kaya laya gi yayu pen tokpo tongo dusumida. Ani inji minji nurse dende chee omaras. Nurse laya nurse draminda chee dos. Nurse nonglo Kurang zula dese mangu yaras. Susu chini dujo jil chena digiras. Ani Kurang e Australia drains. Australia. You're going to Australia.
Yeah, I'll go to Sunshine Coast, close to Brisbane.
Brisbane ki Dhamla Sunshine Coast la tele drawings.
Ah, la.
To pursue your nursing? Ko de nurse lobjun chega Australia drawings.
네. 지난 나스트즈라 디스레. 나스는 콘솔라 다 멤버가 lobjun 때라. 답변은 아주 있는 직 쪽다로 드니 치라. 콘솔라 치는 민다. 당아서 따디디. 칼라는 콘솔라 담보면 직 장디가라 베디 쪼쪼야랑 시케 마레스. 코랑 내추럴 밀카레 다라레마도 가실라 짱다 가실 저 케요 말라니. 딜리 장에서라. 카레는 콘솔라 라고 창주다. 다 난디간도 딜은 되었지 미주들이 기경고 옛날에 내가 옛날에 저어드네 짜 쪽바이나 한들 쪽다 제주라 근데 치는다 하시라 네 로로 장에도 하리나 봐 대패기 좀
So one of the most admirable qualities that I find about nurses is the manner in which they have no sense of disgust, you know, about working with the different excrements, blood, pus, and so forth, because they are trained in that manner. They are educated in that manner. That this is not something that you should be disgusted with. It's natural, a natural component of the human body. So this is something that I really admire about nurses. Like, if not, like if we have to take care of like a really, really elder person who is like physically very weak, then I think we will immediately be disgusted, you know. But they do not have that. So this is the manner in which we can be trained. Our outlook, our minds can be trained.
lo jae ba chi khar ha ko yema ga ta dung ro jires kang ra la nge nip pinje ko je ro 거기 ko ta ro ba chi teleda ta ro ba telena sole ti di gan zang zo do ma be ke 아니 그 ta ro ba de na de ro gan sa ma cho cho de 아니 ta ro ba de la din na da ha so durang yo so jin chi na ji da
malaria
shoge wa je ro ko na de na de 바로 들고 배 차파 시도로 시나 거 녜 빙gal fontada 아니 녜 빙자기 힌디도 시망알로 보셔다사 아니 주로니 마게테 탄다를 질 태월스 아니 아니 또고지 왜양 촌에 네버드 치 바이 딜드레마 평안을 드레마 평안을 도도 마 엔데미 상가 뭐부터 니트 추니지가 네버니니 샤우드 니트 지가 네버니 근데 파슬레디가 미치 정서 다른 좀 있는 통서 단 나서다 더 정말 죽은 거다. 들라 고쳐배기 치듯이 죽어라. 콘솔라 시남 민다. 지단 코시로에서 시고르마도 먼저 딜 시기다. 괜찮다. 신다 배 진감다 수도 이네 지단도 콜레 감다 여러 가서 미리 소 짜고 저에 치듯 되게 감다 여러마도 지단게 네바다 든들 시 코시나요 말아. 근데 이 체벌로 장마저도 아주도 건조 좀 미리 통화 드리면 통화만이 틀어. 배 신앙으로도 아니 이제 지 코로나 빙자 상황 것이죠. 배디 지 배신나 저거 생 저거 슈도 얘네야 나스다 멤버들 하다보다 체스데 챕터마서 통스라. 근데 이 콘솔에 배디도 하래. 신앙함도 남사 오른 저 가르치고는 제 참마 지다. 로 장바데르시다.
So maybe it won't hurt to tell this story at this point. So back in the day, when it was still the age of what we call stone mobiles, Nokia phones, not like digital cellular smartphones. Then at one point, one of my cousin monks, he was visiting us. And one day, as I was in the prayer gathering in the Nunnery, then I received a call that he had another friend who caught malaria. And he was all right in the morning, but out of nowhere, like he had like a burning fever. And then my cousin, who was a monk, called me to help him. And so then we went to one of the bigger hospitals in the valley, down below, in this area called Tanda. And then when we reached the hospital, it was like totally overcrowded. There were like 2 patients on one bed. Now, at that moment, I noticed something like across the many patients, one patient was now at the verge of death. He was almost dying. And then when I saw the reaction of the nurses and the doctors, I found it really amazing. Because when we kind of see such a situation, we immediately become fearful ourselves. We kind of lose our perspective and we become really fearful. But when we saw the manner in which the nurses and the doctors reacted to the situation, they were so calm, they have the same fear about death, but their reaction to the person dying is not informed by a sense of death itself. It's about a concern of trying to save this person, from death. And the manner in which they were so calm, how they were able to do everything so calmly, I was amazed by that. And when I tried to reflect on that, soon, of course, they weren't really able to save him. Soon, the relatives of the patient begin to cry and wail. So at that point, we realized that the patient died. But the reaction of the nurses and the health professionals and doctors, I found it really, really amazing that they are able to remain calm in the face of such an urgent situation. And that's when I realized that the mind can be effectively trained, to not become overly anxious, become extremely reactive in situations. By education and training, we can train to remain calm and collected in such situations.
And the current and that's Jangai Dogina, and it Tamoni Netan is Hakonirata. That corner the Lawija, Kandakan Jan, and Suzuki, the Nedinikangi Tambo Tigers and Cemetery, and you want to never only Chirigala Kanyamara. Chidang it and I do something, you such a share, Majan, Kashila wager, Nebalam Hendo, Chalado, Pachit, Odra, Dharmadhatu.
So now, since you have a wish to pursue this as a profession, I'm trying to give you a true picture of what exactly are the challenges of becoming a nurse, the challenges that you would have to face. Now, with this kind of discussion, I'm trying to give you the most extreme of the challenges you might face, and this is to give you a truer picture. Now, of course, within the different departments in which a nurse works, a nurse might work. Maybe there are some departments wherein the situation is not so urgent all the time like this. Maybe it's just about administrating medicines. There are certain departments like that too. And in Tibetan, we have a saying, hope for the best, prepare for the worst.
Okay, current. Yeah.
Just as we were thinking that we just need to get exposed to find out, to train our mind, I just couldn't help but think of this one funny nun who just mentioned that when you think you're already enlightened, spend a weekend with your family. It was just cute.
Tini kurang ta dinga zo jin da thego re la jora da nyamle ngoni khonsu chuba che ne jin da thego re la di da demba do thong sons ni pena chashana khasan anila ji gila swas kesi churang sang je samsam da lo chenas ra sang je so samsam da chunas ani churang soso gi nami nyam du da chi tong da
Nam kashi ya word ya. Yeah.
What about the difficulty to deal with conflict? If, for example, you live in an area of conflict and you have a friend from the other side of the conflict, so how can you, if you want to share something about her suffering, how can you deal with it and still be compassionate for yourself?
tanda kurangi tiwa dita nyokzing yosagi saja dindile ra ini nganzogi donglen khande chegores pena chashana da saja jila nyokta mak do shukchimbo langde nasra ta dila phajo da chujo la ji ngyo rasta ina ya suzogi roba dita jabjong logaji ni injo che phajo gi chola yijo ra
Suzuki Tromorodi. Pashu Dashala Egypt.
dai chola yijo che ta da nyokta dina da do cha do ra magzing do dina ani tezo ni tinde yudu zamba ani phajogi dungye ra phajo
Dungi.
yo
Pagirong Tromodi.
chomodi gi dungye chobodi gi kanye je ra di susu gi da samshi yo ba ani tela nyingchi yo ba Yan teda nyamdo soso la yan dilana tsudera. Chezan soso la yan ningji gorwasta. Chezan di donglen khande chigurabes.
Di pena di lagora. Ta susu pena ngale phagi dragi shola nigi thomoji phagi yoche. Ta kola kangi thewara.
Kola kanyi yora.
Kangi edigala
Kola ningji.
nigi gora.
Kola samshi. Cheba nangshin sura. Soso yan nyogda na tsudera thawara.
Susu la tsude yo.
Soso yan magdin sasaja thawarang la tsudera. Chezan soso la ningji gorwas. Chezan di nyi nganzo ki donglen khande chigurabes.
Di chitangire suzuki tanda ki thomu di phagi dragi shola yewa ina ra tanda chi lumba ma jela di jekhab kangira ra ini churani geo ki maga sogo ya jeo ma ko di lagmano to kuni parula ani ge mi geba ge so thomu khare ina ko ranja dera ra tanda di jekhab tse bare koran yan rodan chi yora ra ting da khaje ya koran rodan ji ra te so ge ki maga wa chego ya juma 아니 틀라 찍찍라 센서 다야다. 근데 난도 대화 거래 다라 샤이게 좀 봐. 다 소소라 가르치고는 등이 싫은 거지. 소소 파기들다 샹hin지 공고라 강이텐. 나는 두수 스테나 소소가 다 강이들라 다 인터도지는 파기를 좀 말어 저 강이테나 소소라 강이 되고라. 되들가라다 소소가 딜 나다 파라제마 제 말시다더라. 다 이내가 저기다 소소가 레 경험을 레사고 디긴 데브레사메로 소소라 티센다 그양테야도 라 아니 계속 중앙에는 키라니는 느바이나 근데 마투들라 반 자매기 계시시야기 탑시다 계속 느바 메바이나 제제만 판람도 자라.
Now herein it is important that if in such areas of conflict, then if you have like a personal relationship with the perceived enemy, so forth, it is important to understand that we say that many of the personal relationships that we have becomes affected by conflict and so forth, a larger conflict. Now it is important that if you don't buy into the narrative that shapes the conflict, it is important that we do not let our personal relationship with people from the other side be influenced by that. Because it is important that this personal relationship, which was intimate before, which was close before, not be affected by a narrative, by policies of a nation and so forth. And as opposed to that, it should remain intimate, wherein you are able to find some sort of solace, some sort of comfort in being able to share with each other the situations you find yourself in, as opposed to looking at the others as someone from the other side. It is important that we are still able to cultivate that intimate personal relationship by counseling each other when you are distressed, by offering a sense of comfort for each other in times of conflict. This is important. And now, when you ask the question, how do I find compassion for myself? Then if you find compassion for others, then it's a matter of the scope of motivation which helps you, whether you are able to accept the situation that you find yourself in. So if your scope of motivation is if the scope of your motivation is accommodating enough to understand other people's suffering, then you can also learn to be accepting of the situation or the suffering that you find yourself in. For example, try to think about how it's not just only you who is suffering in this conflict. And then from a broader spiritual perspective, try to think about how it's karma that you find yourself in this situation. Now, more importantly, it is important that if you find that your friends, it is important to have dialogue, communication between your friends on the other side and yourself. This is very important. And through dialogue, if you find that you have the capacity to overcome the differences that gave rise to the conflict, then that's exactly what you should do. Try to engage in dialogue, communicate with the other side. Now, if you cannot find the capacity to engage in dialogue and communicate with the other side, then we should not aid and abet the already bad situation. We should not be contributing to the conflict.
What I mean is that she wants to share about the suffering of her people,
Hmm?
and it's like, for me, I don't have an opinion about it, like politically.
Hmm.
But I want to listen to her, but sometimes I feel that it's also can be very heavy things.
Hmm.
So that's why I was asking about the compassion, and also I have the side of my family and the people in my country that's suffering. So it's like I'm trying to show her both sides, but I feel she's very inside her pain, her suffering.
Tini morangi tiwati goya jumzen karin la nasra. Ni pajo cholo jo roba jiyo ras. Di tang wane kora nyang deyo ras.
Koran chomudi.
Choma di nyang deyo ras. Cheza ni korangi mimang, korangi midazugi kanyi shukchamo mambo shenyung ras. Ine di shenyung di zambada korang Geshema gilawa do korang la chapsi gilang cho dine ke mes nyogda di na ra. Ina ya ni pajo digi ta dungye yoy nyangjo mambo shenyung di zambo soso jibu do soringo do asem. 아니 제자다 닝지케라 두점바이 카보차이다스 semba 고랑 디스 지부 부수도 보러 차네라 아니 고랑기 소소기양 소소기 쪽이 남이 빈자 미마이나 미리지바드 저 다가랑나 신문에 냥데요 왔어 더 딥할 셰 두점바 퍼주기 니에 그 각보려도 왔어 가지는 고랑주 퍼주 원행으로 두자 냥데요 왔어 제자 지역구에 줌젠디 퍼주라 닝지 요고야지 그냥 소소소소에 도 동행다 까니들라야라 아니 닝지 요고야지 디간데 소고레스
알레랑 제가 뜻데 요이나 그랑이 동물이라 그랑이들 동물의 창벌에 그 계시층에 아니 콜라 지금 럽스도 자야는 소소기 잡라 아니 가래나 당아도 정말 제 급던데 전도 투운더라 지 마도 제든 신나 당아서 그다기 준주고들 해야 돼 펜토다 게티치스는 데라마가 게티치스면 데라마가 지지면 들어서는 다야체 아니니 딱 고랑이 지나라 그래와 친구지 전에 시고라 얘기 강이디 팔라서지 밀라서지 고고다 라 강이디 같이 생을 냠마토는 찔라고다 파말라는 빙결라는 저런 동물을 되가라 강라지 예치다 하래는 지 강이 발라서 시지 저런 밑자 자 친구지 차고 그러나 근데 인디가라 키라인 거래 그 강이 내anja 파시네 그 강이 더 받쳐서 따디 마시에 전에 코로나 안데 딜럽서로 제 선바 구양도치 갈리갈리 디도 그래 참만 주의라시면 따비랑 시지라 내걸 맞아 그래 야 참보차 그래 야데 무슨 내려라 되네 지도 그래 아니야 그나이기 몰래 저런 게 생들래 강이 망보지 테레 딜레 산나다 지 망보지 다 선을 편도야 말아 와 마투두는 디나로를 소소지 남이 비두도 마도지 근데 처에나 디 지기 사자 댄설런도야 간데 파텐설런도 투야다 디강이들 봐 트라이게 산다는 지 디강이 디치부야 산다데나 아니 sembaku스도 차이라
So now I can understand that we do find ourselves in such situations because of politics and so forth. And now it is important that we value, first we understand the value of such personal relationships. And by that I mean that if someone finds it within themselves to open up about their suffering to you, then it is important that we are aware of the courage, the hope it takes for someone to open up about their suffering. So as such, we must appreciate that first. And when I say that we must appreciate this, I mean that we should not make them hopeless by not lending an ear to what they want to share. We should find it within ourselves to be able to listen to what they want to say, what they want to share about their suffering, because that's exactly what they need, someone to talk to about their problems, suffering. And they look at you with hope as someone who would listen. So as such, it is important we appreciate that. And if we are able to kind of appreciate that, then we can find the seed of compassion within that within that outlook. And then similarly, when we think about ourselves also caught in the conflict, then as it is the case that when you begin to listen to others, then if you begin to share your own problems with others, this is not really helpful for the others. They only want to share like what they are going through. So as such, if you begin to share your own set of problems with them, then that doesn't really help them at that point. Maybe it is important to put their concern above our own concerns at that point. Then similarly, when you are thinking about yourself being caught in the conflict, it is important not to kind of become overwhelmed by thinking extensively about the conflict itself. To come to accept the situation that you find yourself in is very, very important, rather than overthinking about what could be, and so forth. And now, most importantly, I think the realistic kind of approach here is to try to place, if there is a means or if there is a way to secure others from harm, or to secure yourself from harm. Is there a way to kind of help them to move from the conflict area to another place, to settle somewhere else? Or is it the case that you yourself can move to another place to secure your own safety? That is, I think, the most realistic approach one can take.
Matu mambu jagore, kashi chulo jagore, kashi sanyu jagore, mil kangi petere durma mambu jagora, ra. Ani dende taung denda ngi kangi di chipurim da, mit samala kangi dila niya, zamza shembe kangi la sanatani susu de te chung roya roida. Susu chipu sanatan ani pe kangi pe da dende chipu ngala karchuni, ngi jekala karchuni sani seli kepagi pe loyu le shung mato ya chayda. Zamza ende sanatani da.
So human beings are really, really strange in the manner in which they process suffering. And I find that really strange. For example, if you find someone else who is going through the same situation as you, then your own sense of suffering becomes a little bit mitigated. And in English, you have a saying, misery loves company. And for example, this is indeed the case. And when you try to think about being caught up in a war-torn area, in a conflict-ridden area, and if you only think about war happening here, conflict happening here, then you become really, really disturbed, distressed yourself. But if you are able to think about the fact that this is not the only war-torn area in the world, this is not the only conflict-ridden area in the world, there are wars, conflicts happening in many different places of the world, then your own sense of misery and distress maybe lessens a little bit.
Duputangor da ngato junono jo thoya popo momo se gomba toya ani junono jo sama phela ma kasa khona jana la ma oya ani teka ngondo cheya ani phela yang sacha ki pazo chobu soya ra ani kha chola da jing chue sanu ta ya ra wa me ba ta na ngato kundu ku ba je sha chogo ra khana jing do ya da de thona ya pe shina so nima paga jile chumi do pa na ya pa ya ra wa me ba 대대상 단다의 중심 모두 무튼도를 공부도를 전에도도를 시에땅이 시에땅을 땅을 때는 정한 저거야. 봐. 아니 라마다 타와다 다치미 메자이는 전화 전부도 아니 파세야다 투테야다 정하세 단다 무튼도도 당아서 대상단다 컨트롤 멤버로 채워. 봐. 다양 tat pena ngaran susu gela sanadana susu phama thuya phadoya yo mare ani ngazala di pas tigi mare kesi ngaza ende draw ina changa na che ba chande ma ta susu nyang na odera susu ga phama da pingya ta samala kangi the tinde gi ne ta pe zara bu mutine ta da long ta mamu drasar tuji denji na ra tinde ji ne de wor ta sho ji ta tinde sana jang ta da pe nyomba chaya ngi ngada 먼저 미치기 만디 수수기 롬발라 파드야랑 요 메일 롬바지도 되고 라 지 사다 남아도 뭐 메신 신이 좋아진 되고 다이나 상의 직단에 오다 지당이 미 나랑서 저 하마 베베기 파노 뒤에 제 시그르상에도 오다 지니다 카레나 먼저 지부강에 주림도 계속 제그 마다 근데 마이나야 철로자로야 첩시기 강에도 양지 사유자로 참마리바 망보 질레기다 가와이네 그 잠잠한 소지 남들 답했다 강이 뭐지 그러신 레들 라 소소라마다 가지 제가 드레이나이나 칼리드니도 다른 사람이 등이 라셔에서는 먼저 등이 디칼리 테스지 무슨 마저로 책이다.
So now, even though this is a spiritual discussion, now it's turning a little bit political. So if I might share personally, we Tibetans also are an oppressed people. Now it's the third generation who's come into exile. And it's been almost 60 or 70 years since the time of our grandfathers, great-grandfathers who were murdered, imprisoned by the Chinese government. And then our mothers, our parents suffered through the same. And then now it's our generation and the generation after that who still suffer through the oppression, either inside Tibet or away from Tibet in exile. Now, if we think about it, in Tibet from 1950, from the first time the Chinese came, the Tibetans were oppressed. There was genocide. Almost 1 million of us were killed. They mined through all of our natural resources, take them all to China. And then they destroy the pristine natural ecology of the plateau. And there is no religious freedom in Tibet, up to the point wherein even if you keep a photo of the Dalai Lama, you are liable to get imprisoned. And let alone that, there is no freedom of expression at all. Even if you, for something so innocent as singing a song, you could be imprisoned in Tibet. And then when you look at all the great Tibetans who are really capable of effecting change inside Tibet, all of them are poisoned, murdered at a very young age. All of our lamas, all of our leaders and so forth. And then if we kind of think about that only, then even if we reflect on our own personal situation as a consequence of this political situation, then even if I want to go back to Tibet, I cannot go. They wouldn't give me a visa or a pass. And even if I somehow sneak into Tibet, they would imprison me. Now, if that is the extent of the consequence, that's all right. Only I have to bear the consequence. But as a result of me going there, my relatives, all those who are related to me will be interrogated and will be punished. Now, that's the kind of situation that we Tibetans live in, even in exile. So if we think only about our suffering, we would have gone mad already. We would have gone insane already. But that's not the way to approach it, I think. Make sense of our suffering. We are now in a very unfamiliar land, in an under unfamiliar sky. But we try to think about it in this manner that, okay, even though at this turn of history, Tibets and Tibetans find themselves oppressed under a regime, but it was also the case that back in the days when Tibet itself was an empire, it also colonized a lot of other places. So it's just a turn of history that the people and the country find itself in. Then similarly, it's not only Tibet that is going through such repression and oppression. When you look at the world, even in free countries, there are far worse repressions, far worse problems, political repression in the free world. And when we look at the many other countries wherein there are a lot of suffering, famine, flood, and so forth, then our own sense of suffering becomes a little bit mitigated, a little bit less. we do not think too much about our suffering all the time when we try to understand the suffering that is actually in the world. So if we only think about our suffering, then indeed Tibetans would have gone mad already a long time before. So now with that being said, then it is not the case that the Tibetans, as a part of a political movement, is simply just saying that, okay, there is suffering everywhere in the world, so we are not doing anything. That's not the case at all. With that being said, Tibetans are indeed very fortunate to find a second home in India. And as a neighboring country with long established cultural and historical ties, India has been really, really accommodating of the Tibetan exiles. And now, as such, the Tibetans kind of focus all their energy and efforts in educating the future generation to effect change for the Tibetan political movement. And if we think carefully about it, maybe the Tibetans are indeed the longest staying guests in India. And as such, we placed immediately when we came into exile, we placed a lot of importance on building educational institutes for the future generation. And now this kind of effort is bearing some sort of result in this day and age, because now the youth are empowered enough, educated enough to lobby for policy changes in different nations, in different governments. And so that is the manner in which we are trying to politically advocate for the movement. And similarly, Tibetans remain very, very grateful to all the countries in Europe, in the West, who offer refuge and asylum for Tibetans who seek refuge and asylum in these countries with their papers, documentation, and so forth. And now, when I mentioned before that in Tibet you could be imprisoned for something so innocent as singing a song, I meant that in Tibet many singers are imprisoned for singing what is deemed as political songs. Songs in honor of His Holiness the Dalai Lama, songs in honor of the Tibetan people as a distinct people from the Chinese. These are the kind of restrictions there is on freedom of expression in Tibet. So normal songs, maybe the Chinese tolerate it, but these expressions of political and political sovereignty and identity of Tibetan people is still repressed. Now with this, we end our session here today with a dedication prayer. It's taking a strange political turn at the end. Yes. Page number 31 in the prayer book. Nindra Tangje Ji Ngwa Kanla Chodo Ngaba De Dage Gewe Tsawa De Gwencha Sambo Chuchi Ratu Ngwa Ji Pama Simje Tangje Denda Denju Ji Nindro Tangje Tade Tanda Shanju Semba Kanla Suju Teda Kunji Monan Chuchi
나서 안 했었니 이제.
Okay, thank you everyone. See you tomorrow.